everyone. All right, so here's how this is gonna go. I'm going to introduce each of our presenters and tell you a little bit about them. And then I'm gonna pass it over to our host for the evening. And then after we've done our craft talks, we're gonna come back together and have the last conversation about this amazing topic, guys. So I do want to say one more time, if you're going to send messages in the chat box, just remember to send them to all panelists and attendees, or sometimes the option is everyone. But if you only send to panelists, then only the panelists are going to see it. So remember to do that. Consider holding your questions until the end, but you can also throw questions in as we go. And so here we are. Tonight we are doing a special program within our WLTs on the Craft of Writing series, Writing Our Family Stories. And when I first heard from Kris Spisak, who reached out through a mutual friend, and she talked about this topic and wanting to do an event here in Texas, I thought, wow, what a perfect topic for right before Thanksgiving. When are we talking about thinking about family? I think also, for many of us, whether we're able to sit in a room with our family members or we're Zooming with them, which I'm guessing many of us will likely be doing, or some mix of the two, often it's the time when we bring up those family stories and when we remember those moments at that other table years ago. And so to be able to have this conversation tonight and really dig into how writers approach writing about family history, family stories, and preserving them and being true to them in their writing is really exciting. So to do that for tonight with us, we have an amazing group of presenters. And so I'm going to introduce each of them in turn, and we're going to do the virtual clapping. And then I'll let Kris take it away. So born in Riverside, California, Deborah Mouton is an internationally recognized performance poet and the first African-American poet laureate of Houston, Texas. Formerly ranked #2 female performance poet in the world, she is a founding member and executive director of VIP Arts Houston, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting literacy and the arts in underserved populations. Her genre-bending poetry has engendered unconventional collaborations with groups as disparate as the Houston Rockets and the Houston Ballet. Her work has been featured on NPR, the BBC, and the TEDx circuit. Her debut collection, Newsworthy, wrestles with living in a culture infected by white supremacy, where current media is distrusted, cursory, and impossible to escape. She lives and teaches in Houston, Texas. Please welcome Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton.
Hey, everybody.
Yay! All right, wait, I have to move everyone's heads out of the way now so I can get to my little clicking button. Hold on, sorry. Okay, next, so excited to see him again. It's been a while since I've seen him. I'm happy to welcome Antonio Ruiz Camacho. His debut collection, Barefoot Dogs, was published by Scribner and won the Jesse H. Jones Award for Best Work of Fiction. It was a Kirkus Reviews and San Francisco Chronicle Best Book of 2015. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Salon, Texas Monthly, and elsewhere. Born and raised in Toluca, Mexico, he moved to the US at the age of 31 and began to write in English at 35. He earned his MFA from UT Austin's New Writers Project and was a Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford University. Please welcome Antonio Ruiz Camacho.
Hello, everyone.
So glad to have you.
Thanks for inviting me back.
And then finally, Stacy Swann holds an MFA from Texas State University and was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. Her fiction has appeared in Epoch, Memoir, Versal, and other journals, and she is a contributing editor of American Short Fiction. Her debut novel, Olympus, Texas, which I'm lucky enough to have read, and I can tell you is pretty fantastic, is forthcoming from Doubleday in May 2021. Please welcome Stacy Swann with her brand new author photo that I love.
I know, finally got the actual real author photos and not just the photo my sister took of me in the backyard.
with, respect to your sister. She's a wonderful photographer. All right. So bringing our entire program together tonight is this lovely woman who is really responsible for the whole idea behind this. Kris Spisak wrote her first book, Get a Grip on Your Grammar, 250 writing and editing reminders for the curious or confused, with a goal of helping writers of all kinds sharpen their craft and empower their communications. And Grammartopia events follow the same mission, as does her second book, The Novel Editing Workbook, 105 Tricks and Tips for Revising Your Fiction Manuscript. Her third book, dedicated to personal storytelling, is the Family Story Workbook, 105 Prompts and Pointers for Writing Your History. A former college writing instructor, having taught in institutions including the University of Richmond and Virginia Commonwealth University, Kris is now an active speaker, workshop leader, and fiction editor. She's the board chair of James River Writers and is a member of the Alliance of Independent Authors, the Virginia Writers Club, and the Women's Fiction Writers Association. And you can visit her website and learn more about her, but you're also going to learn more about her tonight. So I'm happy to, I think what we'll do is ask all of the panelists, including myself, to go ahead and turn off your video and your audio for a bit. And I'll pass it over to Kris, let her say a few words, more than a few words, and then she's going to bring everyone back in turn. So please welcome Kris Spisak. Take it away, Kris.
Thank you so much, Becca and Jane and everyone. This is that moment where I'm sitting here in Virginia. So hello, Texas. It's really warming my heart so much to be here virtually with y'all because I was born in Texas. I said this earlier, but I haven't really been back to Texas since I was maybe 10, 11 months old, but there's this warmth here. So thank you so much for having me this evening. Now, I have been someone, as I'm guessing many of y'all in this room are as well, I have been someone who has just been drawn to stories as long as I can possibly remember, loving the twists and turns of page turners, loving just the language that can pull you in and make you just pause and stop and consider. I'm someone who will do a deep analysis of the TV show Friends and why the first couple seasons and the last couple seasons are so much better than the ones in the middle, and how you can break that down by just the variance of words, the number of words used and spoken by the characters in the episode. Oh yeah, you can break this stuff down. I'm somebody who can absolutely be fascinated by the fact that the word go hijacked its past tense, went from an entirely different verb. And I'm somebody who will get really down to the nitty gritty of the difference between uninterested and disinterested, and how these are two different words and should be used differently. I'm not a grammar police person. I'm not a believer in that. I'm just someone who believes in the power of language and the power of elevating our choices and the power of speaking and the power of listening. And I think that's hit all of us this year more than ever. Now, when my last book came out last year, 10 years ago, it was actually February, but doesn't February just seem like decades ago to everybody else? Now, when my last book came out, it is the Novel Editing Workbook. And it's really a source for how on earth does somebody edit a book? Yes, you wrote this whole thing, throw the confetti in the air. Now what? What does editing actually mean? So that's what that book was. It launched in February, and we had this massive plan that that book was going to be followed by the Memoir Editing Workbook, so we can empower our stories, figure out what are the story arcs of our lives that created us and transformed us into the people that we are. And that book was coming, and then COVID hit. And I think that might be the sentence of 2020. And then COVID hit, right? And so we all had many plans. The Memoir Editing Workbook kind of got tweaked. Originally, it was going to be this hands in the dirt guide to your own story. But in the spring of 2020, right, as COVID was really coming into all of our lives and we were all in lockdown and dealing with this in all of the ways that we all had to, I was fooling around here in Virginia with writing prompts on my website, started a little YouTube series, just fooling around with this idea of we are living through history. Write this down, folks. We are living through history. Write down that moment that you're walking through that grocery store and you find toilet paper, and oh my gosh, you get excited. Seriously, we got excited about toilet paper in grocery stores. And to be honest, here in Richmond, Virginia, it's happening again, where toilet paper is really scarce on the shelves again. But these are stories. We need to write them down. Our children, our grandchildren are going to want to know these stories. Maybe not the ones about the toilet paper, but the ones about what it is like to have a face mask that you have to remember. What is it like to live our day-to-day, to manage your families, your jobs, all of these little intricacies. And through the course of encouraging folks to write this down, this idea of the memoir editing workbook began to transform. Because we've also been a little bit separated from our families this year, haven't we? And suddenly this work began to transform a little bit into, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about my stories of what it is like to live through 2020 in my world, with my life, with my family, with my neighbors, and all of the complexities that are 2020, suddenly you have those conversations, or you wish you could have those conversations with your family members. What was it like when JFK was shot? What was it like when you watched the moon landing? What was it like in this pivotal moment in your family's history that shaped the people that you became? That story that you always tell at your Thanksgiving table or whatever that virtual table happens to be, that makes you all laugh, that makes you all cry. What are those stories and how can you hold on to them? So that was the impetus of the transformation and rush of this book, bringing it to life quicker than originally planned. This is the Family Story Workbook, because we all sometimes want to write those stories of our life. We all sometimes want to write those stories of our family, our history. It starts with that whole concept of genealogy, but then just digs really deep into where were you on 9/11? Into what was that moment with that friend when you were a little kid that changed the course of your adolescence because of that choice that you made. This is filled with writing prompts that maybe some of them will be fascinating for you. Maybe some of them will be to skip over. Maybe some of them are something that you can do with a sibling or a parent or an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or a child, and tell the same story of the exact same event and see how two of you saw this exact moment in a very different way. Because this is a moment for family conversations, and family conversations are different now than ever before. So we need to take advantage of that, and we need to find a way to record them. And recording them can mean scheduling a weekly Zoom call that is being recorded, or it can mean grabbing this family workbook and writing down your stories. Now, over the summer, a family heirloom fell into my possession. So this key, you can see it here, is centuries old. This is the key to a smokehouse in Ukraine, a country I have never been to. And inside this smokehouse was pretty much everything my family generations ago ever owned in the world. And generations of people in my family had this key, many of whom wore it on their belts and lived their day-to-day holding on to this key. And it's so funny to me because this key made its way across the ocean, down the line, generation after generation, into my hands. And I have never seen this place. This building likely does not stand anymore. My family left Ukraine during and after World War II. And that is a whole story that I hope to record not only in this workbook and in my own fiction, a version of it. But we all have heirlooms. We all have artifacts. We all have memories, both family memories and individual memories. And that's what I want to celebrate. All of this has come together in what I've dubbed the Story Stop Tour, where I am really traveling virtually the nation, celebrating the power of indie bookstores and everything that they are bringing into our community, helping the storytellers, helping the readers, helping the listeners, helping the community conversations and the growth of us all. And I am stopping kind of city by city and just pausing to reflect on the greatness of the writers of that community. And that's where I am tonight. I'm going to step back because you've heard a little bit about who I am, the impetus of the story that maybe is the greatest present for the holidays for your siblings, aunts, uncles, whoever you want to give it to. But I want to take a step back because with me tonight, I'm absolutely honored to have some amazing speakers, some amazing wordsmiths with me, because the stories of our lives transform us into who we are, and telling them is transformative, and listening to others' stories is transformative. And so I'm going to call everyone up kind of one by one to see if I can have everyone tell us a little story about their lives. So first up, Deborah, if you don't mind turning your screen back on with me here tonight. Again, thank you everyone for sharing your time with me and your intimate stories with us all here this evening. Deborah, I was wondering if you would share with us, what is a moment in your life that has inspired an idea, not only in yourself, but in your own writing? How has that happened for you?
Yeah, it's really funny. I always find myself coming back to family. And even when I try to run away from things and create them in these more fictional worlds, there's always elements of people in my life that have shaped me or that have lingered around. You know, I often talk to my brother and sister about my grandfather, who passed away when I was a teenager, but was just this over the top character. He would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to grocery stores and collect like dented food and cans to bring back to create this makeshift farmer's market, I guess, hodgepodge in the middle of his living room floor, so that the neighborhood could come in. And a lot of the elderly people or disabled people in the neighborhood who couldn't get to a store, or who had young children, could kind of come in and just kind of glean what they needed out of his living room floor. And in addition to that, he was much of a military man, right? And kind of fought in the war and left my grandmother and my father to kind of fend for themselves for a few years. And so he came back, a little damaged, right? A little bit, not all there sometimes, but just kind of this quirky character who would, light fireplaces and burn fires in the middle of June just because every day needed a fire. And that was just something, my grandfather believed in. My siblings and I often joke about this one moment where I was really young, and I remember filling the bathtub up with water. My grandfather told me I had to go run my own bath, and I was like 5. And I remember telling him, I don't know how to run the bath. Like, I'm too young to do that. And he just kind of brushed me off. He wanted to watch 60 Minutes and like eat on his little TV tray in front of the fire, right? And just kind of be left alone from the children. And so I remember kind of like toddling into the bathroom on this really like cold, they had like that cold checkered floor, right, in LA. And I remember like the floor being so cold, and there's kind of this like big clawfoot tub in front of me, and filling the tub up with this like frigid ice cold water, right? Because I couldn't figure out how to turn the hot water on because I was like 5, like someone like 5, 7 years old. And it gets about 3/4 of the way through when I decide I'm going to put my body into the frigid water. And I realized that that's a terrible idea immediately. And so I kind of recoil and scream, and my grandmother and grandfather come running in the room, and my grandfather finds that the tub is full of cold water, and that in his mind, I've wasted the water. And he begins to just like kind of berate me and kind of go crazy, and just kind of yell and scream and cuss and fuss. And, he didn't hit me, but I definitely got the point that he wasn't happy with what I did. And my grandmother, it was one of the very few times I remember my grandmother kind of standing up to my grandfather and saying like, hey, you've gone too far. I let you get away with a lot of things, but you're not going to yell at this kid, right? And I remember her stepping in that way and seeing my grandmother in this brand new light kind of in this moment. And also seeing my grandfather kind of shut up for once, right? Which is like another thing I never got to see do. And he kind of grumbled back to his seat, kind of angry and ornery, and, clicked to 60 Minutes. And then the next thing I know, my grandmother was like, just come on, let's get his food. He's just hangry and mean and ornery, and we'll make it work. So she brought him a plate, and they kissed, and it was just like nothing happened, And I think back to that a lot when I start thinking of what love looks like, and how I look at what marriage should look like with my spouse, with my husband, and seeing that there was kind of this thing where they checked each other and kind of kept each other in boundaries. And it was a way that they loved each other in this really unconditional way where they didn't ignore anyone's faults, but they kind of saw them all very clearly and kind of knew when to pull the reins or when to say something. And so I find myself tumbling into moments like that, right? Of thinking about that, the life we have are the first stories that we live, right? And then we experience deep in our bones, and we're able to tap back to those. We're able to relive them all over again, and also connect with other people. I often tell people, close your eyes, imagine what your grandmother's house smells like, right? And everyone has a smell. It's never the same smell, but everyone has a unique smell. And so there's something in story that kind of like can pull us back in, can unify us in ways that we didn't think about, can draw us into time, into place, right? Whether you've ever been to Los Angeles or not, I'm sure you could imagine what my grandfather looks like on, a large cloth couch, right, with an old tin TV tray, and clicking an old remote through 60 Minutes as he grumbles and fusses about the nature of the world. And I think that is what is the most beautiful part about storytelling, right, is that we can find ourselves in and out of each other's lives so easily, and so overwhelmed by the senses of it, right, and so familiar to something that may be in every other space, wildly unfamiliar.
Right.
So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like it speaks to so much as writers, no matter what we happen to write. We're always told that advice of write what you know, and so many people can take that in so many different ways. But sometimes it's that checkerboard tile on the bathroom floor. Sometimes it's that episode of 60 Minutes and the focus of someone looking over their tray of their TV dinner or whatever they happen to have. But those little details, they make us who we are. They flesh us out as writers. That's powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No, anytime.
Thank you. And Antonio, I'm going to turn to you. I am just completely loving this event because this is a little intimate glimpse into the lives of amazing writers and how they have become who they are, how their little perspectives on the world have created such profound masterpieces. Antonio, so what's a family story that you grew up hearing that really stuck with you, and maybe even influenced your own storytelling?
Thanks, Kris. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I think it's wonderful work that you're doing, just like getting to people to think about their own family stories and how we can share them. And as you were talking, I was thinking, there's also a lot of power in those stories that we don't talk about as families, right? That are kind of like influence who we are, but are seldom discussed. And they just stay there in your memory. I think in my case, as a writer, I think it's the same for everybody. Like memory is such a driving force, and how it works in terms of like vivid images, or like it's very sensorial, as Deborah was saying, like smells, like very specific details, right? So there was this memory that I had growing up of a relative of mine who disappeared when I was young. And then I had this very vivid image of how she was found. A few years ago, when I was going to publish my story collection, this story collection is called Barefoot Dogs. It's about this family from Mexico City who has to flee the country after the patriarch disappears. And it's partly inspired in the wave of kidnappings and disappearances and violence that's been ravaging through Mexico for the past few decades. And as I started sharing the stories in the book, people started asking me, like, how much of these stories were autobiographical. And for autobiographical, what they basically meant is how much of these happened to you or your family, right? Unfortunately, none of the specific stories or anecdotes or events depicted in the book happened to me or anyone I know. But I grew up surrounded by different forms of violence, and I had like different memories about like similar experiences. So I decided to write an essay when the book was coming out about like these different experiences. And I opened the essay with this particular memory that I was talking about. And it's very quick, the opening. I'm going to read it first, and then I'm going to elaborate on why that was so compelling to me. I was just a kid when my cousin Kuka passed away. I remember running around the living room of her house, one of those 1950s minimalistic box-shaped mansions in the affluent Mexico City neighborhood of Colonia, Florida. The carpet is olive green, the furniture classic and dark. Am I 7, 8? She's sweet and serious, perched on the edge of the sofa with her hands pursed on her lap, watching me go mad, refraining from asking me to stop, her patience a laborious act of love. It was in the early 80s when she disappeared. I wasn't even 12. Kuka was about to go on vacation, but she didn't get to take the flight, never reached the airport. Kidnappings and disappearances were rare occurrences in Mexico back then. No one could fathom where she was or what could have happened to her. You could say her husband reported her absence to the authorities, but that would be inaccurate. In Mexico, those who can afford it know better than to call the police. Instead, he reached out to his government contacts. Within weeks, a team of state and federal law enforcement agents had tracked down and arrested Kuka's gardener and housekeeper. They were lovers, it turned out, and they had confessed to kidnapping and murdering her. I remember hiding behind the door of my parents' bedroom in disbelief as my dad broke the news to my mom. Police had found Kuka's luxury sedan buried on an isolated mountain 55 miles west of Mexico City, her body inside the trunk of the car. Kuka was the first person I knew to die this way. I struggled to imagine what must have gone through her mind in her final hours. The realization that she wouldn't see her children again, that they would never know where she was when her life was taken. Her fate filled me with a sadness and horror I couldn't articulate for years. Only recently did I discuss Kuka's kidnapping with my mother again, and she corrected my memory. The housekeeper and the gardener hadn't meant to abduct her. They had intended to rob her house. Their mistake had been to strike as soon as they saw Kuka walk out the door. In fact, she had made just a quick visit to the supermarket to buy some last-minute essentials for her trip. 15 minutes later, she cut her own service helping themselves to her valuables. Amateur criminals, my mother said, they took her away in her own car, and after failing to cash a check for an unusually large amount they had forced her to sign, they strangled her. My mother confirmed that Kuka had been found in the luggage compartment of her sedan. I asked if she recalled how she had been discovered, in what position. I wanted to know whether the image of my cousin's corpse, folded perfectly into like a flip cell phone, which kept me awake at night as a kid and haunts me to this day, was real or just the product of my fright, my obsession. But Mom said, no, you didn't make that up. That's how she was found. They had folded her legs that way. So what I remember that image very clearly. So, and whenever I talk about how stories come to me, they usually come in the form of these very vivid images. And then writing the story is all about kind of like investigating this image, what it means, who's the character or the characters in this image, what they want, where they are, et cetera, right? What's so interesting to me is how, like, the power of memory in sensorial terms. Like, you can trust the smells, the images, but maybe the facts not so much. Like, the facts you need to do like sort of like a journalistic investigation to fact check your memory, right? Because I remember this image so vividly, but it felt so unlikely, right? Whereas the facts, what happened to her, the reason why she died or she went through this experience was inaccurate. It's something that my mind had altered. But the image, unlikely as it seemed, was pretty accurate. So to me, that's very interesting in the way how we remember experiences and how we can both like trust our memory with these different clues that it offers, but at the same time kind of like probe her and investigate our memory in order to tell like stories that really convey our true emotions and experiences.
Right, and that's so incredibly powerful. And I'm sure as you're speaking, I'm just there's so many different moments, I think, in all of our lives, some bigger and some smaller, that maybe we saw something or heard something that we weren't supposed to. And maybe we were young, and that, whatever it was, and maybe you're thinking about this, those of you who are attending here tonight, of that one thing we were not supposed to know about, or that little detail that was partially kept from us. And we have that something that shaped the rest of our lives, whether we even realize it or not, something that haunts us. And that's fascinating. And thank you so much, Antonio, for sharing that story. That's powerful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Again, I'm honored to be sitting here with you all. Thank you for joining me. And Stacy, if I could call you up to video here too. Thank you for being here. So how about you? What is a moment in your life that shaped the writer that you have become in some way?
Oh, well, it's such an interesting topic, and I've been just really engrossed in both of the stories tonight from Antonio and Deborah. So I am almost entirely a fiction writer, and have not written a ton of nonfiction, just essays here and there. And I found for a long time, I was really hesitant to kind of include anything in my own life in my stories. I felt like that wasn't why I was writing, but something that always was included was landscape and the landscapes I had lived in. And I found that even if I wasn't using family stories or things that had happened to me, it was always the land that my family had lived on, or the land that my grandparents lived on. And I created these new stories in these places. It was like having this real rooted place grounded me in my own life, and I was able to add these fictional elements in. But finally, after I've been writing for a few years, I was in my last year of grad school, and I wrote my first short story that actually was kind of rooted in something that had happened to me as a child, and I used that as a kind of foundation for the story. So what had happened was when I think I was probably around 10 or 11, and we lived out in the country in rural Texas, outside of Houston. And we had dogs. And my whole life growing up, our dogs were always outdoor dogs. My parents didn't believe in having pets inside the house except for the goldfish. And we had cats that were outside cats. And that was always fine. That was just, how our pet situation worked. But I got a puppy that then grew into a dog that was named King. And King was part Rottweiler, part German Shepherd, and who knows what else. And he was a really big dog. And he was very sweet to the family. You could trust him with children. Not so good with strangers, right? So in that way, he was a good guard dog. And the dogs roamed around the countryside. And then they would always come back, in the evenings for dinner. And King started fighting with other dogs in the neighborhood while he was out and about. And it got bad enough that our neighbor, who was we didn't have any neighbors that were right next door. So our closest neighbor was like a quarter of a mile away. And his dog got hurt enough that he told my father that if my dog, came back down there, that he was going to take care of my dog, right? And so my father put my dog on a chain because we didn't have a fenced yard that would keep a dog in. And so he was on this really long chain. And we watched the dog just for I'm not sure if it was a few days or a week, but he was just really miserable on the chain. It wasn't what he was used to. And so my father decided that wasn't what he wanted to do. So he let the dog free again. And sure enough, a couple of days later, my neighbor, he went back down, got in another fight with the neighbor's dog, and the neighbor shot him. So very rural country story, right? And this was you have to remember too, this was the 1980s, right? And there was just kind of a different view of pets and what was expected. And so that was a really, upsetting thing that happened in my childhood that just kind of lived there for a long time. And I think the reason why it popped up in the first story I ever wrote that was about a memory is because I think the best fiction wrestles with things that we don't understand. And I think as a child, I just, I didn't understand how it got to that point, right? That everyone involved thought that this was the only solution to the problem. And so I think by taking that story and putting it in fiction and actually really fictionalizing it. So this is something that happened in the past of the character. But the story takes place when she's in her early 20s. She has a relationship and a past relationship with the son of the man that has killed her dog as a child. And it was, a vehicle to explore these ideas about why we do things sometimes that hurt other people. And why sometimes those things feel unavoidable. So I just, as a fiction writer, I know if there's anybody listening that writes fiction, I just really encourage you to think about the ways, when you use your life story in your fiction, it doesn't have to be straight verbatim out of your own past. You can think of these places or these moments as jumping off points to kind of merge with something else and to kind of explore those things that you don't quite understand about your own life with a lens that gives you more perspective. And I just wanted to give a little shout out at the end to Larkin Owl Bookstore. If those of you listening haven't been there, I managed to visit there pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, and it's just a beautiful store. It's one of those bookstores where you're like, oh man, I could come here, every week and just hang out for an hour looking at the shelves and looking at all the other items. And it's a beautiful place.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And I love that you're coming at this and really speaking about fiction, because I think one of my favorite ideas about fiction, I've heard it said, is that fiction is not there to give people the answers. Fiction is there to let readers ask the right questions. And I think it's true for the writers of fiction. It's true for the writers of everything. Also, just the more you write, the more you can explore the big questions of whatever it is in the world that you are looking into, whether it is yourself, whether it is our surroundings and what is going on in the world. But writers write for so many reasons. So when we talk about writing our stories and writing our memories or writing our family stories, it's for history, whether you're passing it down for future generations or whether you're just writing it for yourself. But also it's to mine all of these questions that you didn't even realize that you still had lingering. And I love that. Thank you so much, Stacy, for doing that. And I know I'm talking to a big group of writers here, and not everyone in the world is a wordsmith or a published author like these amazing people who are with me here this evening. But every single one of us has stories, right? Every single one of us, every single member of our family has stories. And not only is it rich material for the writers and storytellers of the world, but it's just rich material to be preserved. And again, that's where this whole impetus came from. And that's, again, why I'm celebrating all of the amazing indie bookstores around the country who are just doing such amazing work for the storytellers of the world and for the readers of the world. And this is where I'm so excited to be able to have a chance to join in with folks to just hear these stories, because we all have them, and getting the kind of behind the scenes stories of some awesome local authors is just so wonderful. Thank you so much, Stacy. And so I mentioned these are my story stops. I'm kind of traveling the country with these. And of course, we're all virtual these days. So if anybody's ever interested in tuning in to these story stops, I've done Richmond, hello, Texas. I'll be doing story stops in Atlanta, New York, Philadelphia, Savannah. I have a whole bunch coming on. So feel free to tune into my website if you really just want intimate glimpses on some amazing authors' lives as they're telling their stories. And I encourage you, before I toss it back to Becca, that we all have stories. And what is it about your life that you want to preserve? Maybe it is those favorite family stories. Maybe it is that story about your grandmother, for me, I have this story about my grandmother who just completely lost her temper one time. And she was in a place where there was a pond and she was fearless. And she actually grabbed a frog out of the pond and put the frog down the shirt of her big brother who was torturing her. And it's just funny to me that this story about my grandmother and the frog in the pond has trickled down for generations. She's not with us anymore, but this story about my grandmother and just being so angry she stuck a frog down her brother's shirt, it's a story that stuck. And you know what? I don't want to lose that story. It's just this really random story, but it's a really good story. So what are the stories in your life that you don't want to preserve? Recording them can mean so many things, especially in this day and age. It can mean writing it down physically with paper. It can be typing it. It can be sitting down and recording a conversation with you and a loved one or whoever you want to be doing it. Or this can be a solo. If you are in lockdown or quarantine or just kind of laying low this strange season that we're in, and you need something to keep you going, this is a project for the generation. So I'm just encouraging everyone to just think on their own lives, think on their families, and use this as an impetus for connection, because we need connection more than ever these days, don't we? So Becca, I will turn it over to you because I know you have some questions going on here, but thank you for everyone being here and sharing this.
So I'm going to invite all of our panelists, presenters to come back on and show us your beautiful mugs again. Wow, that was really great. And what a wonderful idea for the way to frame an event, Kris. I love this idea of just, having each person have the opportunity to share a story and then connect it to writing. And I've just been super inspired by the whole conversation. So by each of these presentations. So I wanted to ask a few questions, and then of course answer some of the questions coming in from the audience. And I think the first one would be, and I'd be interested to hear sort of each of you say what you'd like about this. And that is that when we talk about writing family stories, and especially if we talk about them with an eye towards sharing family stories, publishing stories that might be connected to our families, how do you balance that sort of the fact that it's not just your story, it's the story of other people? How do you balance that, and how do you think about it as a writer, not only when you're crafting the story itself initially, but then when you're actually considering sharing it beyond your own sort of, computer screen? And I imagine, Kris, I'll start with you because I imagine you have advice for that. And then I'd be interested to hear how each of these wonderful writers thinks about that too.
Thank you. And I love that you're bringing that up, because there's a really big difference for writing something down for the history of your family for memory versus writing something down for the greater publishing world. And this is one of those matters of respect with your family, because you have your truth. Nobody can take your truth from you, your memories from you, but everybody in your family, you don't want to write something so devastating that you necessarily create divides in relationships in lives. And that can happen. I mean, whether you realize it or not, whether details are captured incorrectly or all of that, but it's worth conversations if you're considering publishing, especially in the nonfiction world, family history, because there are many memories involved, and you want to make sure to give some respect and take some time to consider the other perspectives that are going on in that conversation. Now, whether you're choosing to publish, even if someone is not completely happy, that is a larger conversation in the world. But it is, before you toss a big family story out there, or just an individual story, a relative story, a friend's story with their name attached, especially, you want to take your time with that. I wouldn't toss that out without some due consideration, whether it is letting them be a beta reader, whether it is letting them just be aware and having that conversation. But I always want to start with respect. You always want to respect the others involved.
And I can't help but think that Antonio might have something to add to this. What are you thinking about in those situations when you are writing about a particular family story or a story about a true story?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing that I always tell students in these craft classes where I teach how to use these real life stories in writing is I would start with two main questions. Like, one, is this anecdote or this story a good story in terms of storytelling? Because not every great story or every great family anecdote or every sad story is actually a good story. And we can spend 45 minutes discussing what makes a good story, but basically something that's enthralling and that has kind of like a journey, a sense of transformation or movement, right? The first, is it a good story? Yeah. If the answer is yes by itself, okay, the second question would be, do you feel comfortable if all the protagonists in the story go public with the story? Let's say this story about your mother, are you comfortable exposing your mother to the world, knowing that she's the protagonist in this story? Because we are, as writers, like, it comes with the territory, right? To share our personal lives, or anecdotes, something about ourselves with our readers or the audience, if you will. But our relatives do not have to pay the price of our wanting to be writers, right? So some of them might want to remain anonymous or are not very public. They might not like to share their own story. So you have to take that into consideration. If you feel that you want to keep their names private, you want to respect their privacy, maybe you want to go fiction with these stories. Or maybe if the story is not strong enough in itself, you can mix it, as Stacy said, you can like blend it with other real life stories, kind of like create composite characters, composite storylines, or just mix it with fictional elements and come up with a different result, but that it's fiction altogether, right? I think I would start with those two main considerations first.
Yeah, and I love Chick in our chat box said, our relatives do not have to pay the price for us wanting to be writers. Oh, it is a great quote. Stacy or Deborah, do you have anything you want to add to this in terms of, what your considerations are when you are writing real life family stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think I often say write honestly and then edit with love. So I think that your initial, vomitos of the story should be its complete accurate moment. It should be everything you remember, every detail that you didn't think was important, but suddenly flooded back to you in the moment. It should kind of be this sensory overload. And then you should walk away from it and come back to it and think about what portions you actually want to share. And I think that serves for a really great tool for revision of being able to just kind of pare down and think about, what are the parts that are important enough to carry the story? What are the things about the characters that you feel comfortable letting the world know? My husband and I have rules about us sharing personal things. And so I often will say, like, well, how far up in our lives am I able to share now? Right? Like, you don't want to share present, and that's okay. But like, we've been together 10 years. So can I have like the first 4 years or 5 years? Right. It's kind of always this bargaining chip with certain people in my life of kind of like, how much are we willing to unveil to the world before it's considered the past and it's okay. And so I think just being really clear with those boundaries and knowing that everything that you write doesn't have to be shared. And everything that you share, is going to be one that's open for critique and open for people's interpretation. So for instance, I have a story about my mom spanking me when I was really young. And because, that's what Black moms did, in 1980 something and 90 something and still do sometimes. And I let some younger readers in one of my high school classes I was reading, I used it as a prompt, and kind of let them see. And the first thing they said was that your mom abused you. And I was like, oh, Oh, no. That's not what I meant at all, right? So I think even just understanding that as generations go, the interpretations of what happens to you have to be handled with, kid gloves sometimes, and have to be really delicate, because just because you wrote it down doesn't mean that you'll always be there to explain the intentions of it. And so just having that in mind as you write is one that's, I think, or not even write, but as you edit, is something that's important.
I love the idea of your calendar in the future having certain dates circled, and you're like, that's the date that I get that story about my husband and I from 5 years ago. Gotta wait till 2023 and then it's mine.
I mean, it's real talk, like we're not the same people that we were. And so I think, we can talk about being love newlyweds, at year 10, right? Like, because we're not newlyweds anymore, even though we're still in love, right? Like that kind of moment of that swooning, like, oh, you're brand new to me, is really gone. And we're very familiar now. And then that's a beautiful thing. So I think being able to kind of talk about yourself in stages and know which stages are available for writing is important.
I love it. Stacy, do you have anything you want to add to this question?
I will say it's like one of the things that I find comforting about fiction is you always have plausible deniability. You can be like, oh no, that didn't really happen. Even though they always want to ask, like Antonio was saying about, was that from your real life? But you can always say no, and there's no way for them to prove it. So that's nice. But I think the other thing I might add too is, as people who like to write, when we hear good stories from other people, I think we have a tendency to file them away, right? Because we're like, oh man, that's a really great story. And so what I've tried to always do is when I take stories that somehow feed, even in small ways, into my work from friends, I always run it past them before they use it, even though the names are changed, just because I think it feels weird and invasive, right? If you're reading someone's story and something from your own life pops up in it. It's definitely not something that you have to do, but I find like with my friendships that feels what's best to me. And I always remember this story I had as a workshop professor, Colm Toybeen, who's an Irish writer, and he is very close friends with Anne Enright, who wrote this novel, The Gathering. And this was about like in 2008, I think. And so they were close friends. So Colm had told her everything about his childhood, and she repurposed that into The Gathering. So the house in The Gathering is Colm's childhood home. The sisters in the book are his sisters. The things that happened to the sisters happened to his sisters. And of course, Colm didn't talk to his family at all, and neither did Anne. And when he taught the story, The Gathering had only been out for like maybe 8 months or something, and Colm's sisters weren't speaking to him at that moment because of that. So anyway, that's just always, I feel like the on the other end of the spectrum. Some authors they're like, well, the story is above all, and so I'm not really gonna worry about those things. But it has repercussions in your relationships.
Wow. I love it. So there has been a lot of talk tonight, a few times each of you, you've mentioned senses and how important the senses are when it comes to, especially the connection with memory. And I know we've all probably heard that the sense of smell is the most directly connected to our memory. But as writers, that is something that I imagine you go to as you're recreating these moments and these stories and when you're connecting with those memories. So I guess I would love to just hear from each of you about how you think of, how you bring the senses into your writing. Are they a tool for you in terms of just getting the writing started? Are you, when you're stuck in a scene, is there a particular, thing you do with, okay, what is my character smelling right now or hearing right now that helps you sort of shake things up a little bit? Can you just talk to us about, those tools that can be so helpful for writers, the five senses? Stacy Swann, I'm looking at your head, so I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah, it's, I think there's so many different processes for writing. And I think a lot of people begin out of the senses as a way to ground them in scene. I tend to ground myself more in dialogue for whatever reason. So for me, sensory imagery is kind of a revision step. It's adding, like I write it, it's very sketchy, at least dialogue heavy scenes. And then I have to go back and kind of feed that in. But I do find it, just speaking of, like, I know that Kris's book probably has, has all these amazing prompts. I have been really amazed how if you just sit down with a prompt and think of it, like once I was thinking of my garage, the garage where in the house I grew up. And if you just sit there and start writing using specific images, you will remember so much more than you would have thought that you were able to. So I always love that as an exercise.
That must have been some garage. Deborah, what about you and the senses? What's your relationship with using them in terms of, what do they do for you in your writing?
So I think I work the opposite of Stacy. I'm all imagery first, right? Like it's like bleh, everywhere. And I think that's probably just because, so much of what I started as was as a poet and still am. It's kind of thinking of like collecting moments and kind of this freeze frame on a single moment and giving us all the details out and being able to just kind of stop and breathe it in. And so I find that for me, imagery is kind of a tool to focus and to think about, there may be descriptions or dialogue that moves me into a scene, but the imagery is what really settles me and grounds me in the scene, right? And like really lets us sit there for a little longer and focus in and feel what it is to sit in that moment. And so I find myself using imagery that way. But overall, I think all of my work finds its way of being very lyrical and very like over the top and sensory. So I hope y'all like that, because that's what's coming to your bookstores. Like
we do. So Antonio, what about you? Because I imagine, especially, in journalism, that's sort of a great way to transport your readers to a very specific place. What's your relationship with the senses? I hope everyone else is as interested in the senses as I am.
It is super important. And it's funny because to me, memory is such a powerful tool that when I start just like imagining a place or revisiting a place in my mind, I start smelling things, the way these places used to smell. And like it's even like a sensory thing. I feel like I could touch the specific items in those places. But I wanted to mention very quickly a writing prompt. When I was when I was Stanford as a Knight Fellow, I took this nonfiction workshop with Maria Hummel, a wonderful writer. She's a poet, novelist, memoirist. She does everything very well. She's a former Stegner Fellow, as Stacy too. And I remember one day she came into class with this brown bag. I was folded. We didn't know what was in the bag. And so the writing prompt was like, we would pass the bag around. We would have a moment with the bag. We could open it, smell what was inside, maybe touch it, but no one knew what was inside. And after we passed it along, we would start writing the first scene or memory or whatever that would come to mind after coming in contact with whatever it was in the bag. But we couldn't say what was in the bag. Turned out the bag was filled with just dry leaves. It was the fall, and I imagine perfectly Maria before coming into class, just like grabbing some leaves on campus and just like filling the bag with them. And it was such a wonderful experience because the fact that you don't know what's in the bag immediately gets your mind going. You start imagining what's in the bag and your relationship with brown bags in your life. What that means, the meaning of something that carries something inside that you don't know. And then when you come in contact with these objects by smelling them, by touching them, it kind of like triggers memories that you don't even know where they're coming from, right? And what's wonderful about just like following the path of memory is you don't even need to make sense of what's coming to you. You will make sense of that in revision. But you need to trust what's coming to you because your memory is very, very wise in how it retrieves the material that you need for the story, if that makes sense.
That is so cool and and I was terrified to find out what was in that bag. I'm so glad it was leaves.
Yeah, everybody was kind of like freaking out in class. Like, what's there?
That's an awesome writing prompt. I love it. Kris, I was actually going to ask you, and then I'm going to go to some of the questions that we have, but I was going to ask you if there was a particular writing prompt in the book that you'd want to share with folks here, and maybe, they could be thinking about it over Thanksgiving, and maybe they could say it aloud at the Thanksgiving table, the virtual table or otherwise, and get folks talking about a particular thing. Just to put you on the spot, because I didn't ask.
I know, and I'm suddenly sitting here flipping. Let me see. So I'm going to say one of my favorite sections of the book, because it's broken down into different sections. The first section is all about your kind of family history. And the second section is all about you. And it's really digging deep into the moments of your own life. And it kind of goes through the different sections of things. One of my favorite sections of the book is kind of a digging deeper section where it says, okay, well, what does the word family mean to you? What does that word even mean to you? And it's kind of these bigger questions on what does living a good life mean to you? What does faith mean to you? And it has about 10 of these really, really broad ideas that you can't put into one sentence. And if you're thinking about a deep family conversation around the dinner table, okay, so what does a successful life mean to you? Where did you come up with this idea? How has that changed for you from the time you were 20 to where you are right now? From the time you were a kid and you imagine who you would be as a happy, successful grown-up to who you are today and how that has changed. So I think that's kind of my prompt to toss everybody, is just thinking of these words of what is a successful life? What is a happy life? What is family? Just kind of these big ideas. What is that definition for you? And then toss that to your family members. What is their answer and why? The why is, we're writers. The why is always the most fun part, right?
Well, and I imagine the why leads to a lot of family stories and memories, because when you're a kid, you probably figure out what a successful life is based on someone in your own life, and either I don't want that life or I do want that life, and you kind of measure. I love that. I'm going to ask a couple of the questions that have come in. So our YouTube audience, guys, someone has asked, as published authors, this is going back to what we were talking about in terms of people we're writing about. Do you think it's better to reach out to the people you're writing about before reaching out to an editor? So meaning, would you take care of that business? I think this is what they're saying in terms of, whatever reckoning you might need to have with the people in the stories before you actually start moving down the road to publishing. Any suggestions?
Can I answer this?
Yeah.
One? So I think it depends on who the person is and what your relationship is. My mom and I, we were having this conversation because I've done a lot of writing about her in my upcoming manuscript. And we were talking, and she was like, I don't care what you write about me. And she's like, it's your truth. It's what you believe. It's how you perceive things. And so however you write it is right. And, whatever conversations we have to have around the work after that, that's fine. But, you and I know the truth. We know how we feel about each other. And so whatever the world takes from it is their business and not mine. So I think in that case, if you have people in your life that are kind of open to that and know that, the way that people love comedians, they know they're going to end up in a skit, as long as you have those people that are like, I know I'm going to end up in a story for this one, right? Then maybe you don't need to go to them as thoroughly. But I think that it is always great to just kind of give people a heads up that even if it's just general of like, hey, I've been investigating what love looks like for me, and you popped up, so don't be surprised if you're there. I don't know that it always has to be permission, but I think a heads up is always nice. I would want a heads up.
Yeah. And probably, doing that before you get to a place where someone says, oh no, I like this exactly as it's written, you can't change it now. Is probably the way to do it. If you really would change it because of what someone said to you in terms of who's in the story, then make that happen before you enter the publishing side of it. Because I'll say, as a former agent and someone who worked in publishing, that would be extremely frustrating if you presented me with a manuscript And then later you said, no, not gonna, not gonna include that one story that you think is really great because I realized that my mom would get really mad.
Yeah.
There was another question too about earlier, and I love this question. I'm wondering if any of you, especially if you've written about family history, meaning, not folks that you can talk to right now, but like your generation and the generation before you. How do you, for readers, create that really authentic moment in time in terms of, whether it's the sensory imagery or what have you, for a generation or a moment in time that you weren't alive for? So is it research? Is it what kind of stuff do you do to make sure that it feels real?
I think, go ahead, Stacy.
This very tiny thing. I heard this at a panel once at AWP. If you're writing about America and it's after like 1870 or 1880, I think, Sears Roebuck if you find the old Sears Roebuck catalogs, you will find all the objects for any given year that might have been in the home. And I thought that was really cool. I never would have thought of that. And now so many of those things are online or scanned into databases. So that's just a very tiny, concrete thing.
So that talk about memory sparking. You saying Sears Roebuck catalog just took me to the Oaks Mall in Gainesville, Florida, like circa 1979. And me and my mom flipping through the catalog there.
Uh-oh, I think, did Becca freeze or have I frozen?
Did you have a tip too for this question? Me, I think. Hello, am I back?
We got you now.
Yes, you're back.
You guys all froze. It wasn't me. Kris, did you have a response to that question too?
Absolutely, and I think this is somewhere early on in kind of the origins of this project. I mean, I am a author who writes about writing. All of my books thus far are books on this style. However, I play a lot in lots of other spaces, from fiction, poetry, and other places. And I think it was the origin of a lot of this is playing in the historical fiction place, where you realize you have this moment, characters walk into a room in maybe a different country, in a different decade, in a different century. And you walk into that room and you need to make that place real for your readers. And yes, it's that sensory detail that you're talking about, that you can't just talk about the walls or the carpet or those cliche things, because so many writers kind of have those first draft sensory descriptions that could be anywhere, that could be any place, but you want to actually pull them into not just cliche first draft world that anybody could have written. You want to pull them into the specific time, place that is something they can imagine. I always tell people when I'm wearing my editor hat that you need to make sure that you're not writing on a black movie screen. You need to have all of those details. And then when you are trying to figure them out, I think Stacy's concept of old magazines is great. Looking at old publications, old magazines, old newspapers, looking at old diaries, looking at just old artifacts, looking at Googling to find out fashion in that era, Googling to find out furniture trends of a certain decade, housing, colors on the wall. It's funny, I mean, obviously you can't just trust Google for all things, but it's an amazing starting spot for just capturing the reality of a place, because you have to make sure you're not just writing into a cliche old Western. You have to make sure you're not just getting the swinging doors on the bar. You have to really dive deep for this stuff.
Yeah. This reminds me, we have a wonderful writer and artist who teaches for us occasionally, Carol Dawson, and she has done this talk where she talks about a family story that was sort of infamous in her family. And she found the newspaper article about it and was able to read what really happened, which was so different from what had been passed down and passed down and passed down. And it happened to be a story of a, great grandfather shooting a man in the streets of a downtown town in Texas. So it was covered by the newspaper, but that's kind of, if you get that opportunity to find a journal or find someone's actual account of the experience, how cool.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say, like I know Attica Locke has said like she rented like a whole like hotel, right? Like, or not hotel, but like, she rented an Airbnb and was actually like submerged herself in the place she was writing about. I know that it's different now with COVID and, we can't just run out as quickly as we could have, but I think there is something to be said about like actual immersion into the place and the things that you're writing about, if it's possible. I was on a trip with my mom to Alabama to visit like family recently, and I made her kind of drive me around the neighborhood and just kind of talk me through what her childhood was like. And that was really, really insightful to creating things later on in her life that could help draw on some of those like impetuses that helped shape who she was. So sometimes you'll find that work that you didn't realize needed to be connected is when you kind of fully submerge yourself.
Cool. Well, I think we're getting to the end of our wonderful conversation here, guys. I guess, I want to thank all of our presenters who have been so wonderful. And it's been such a treat to hear each of you talk about craft and about your own stories. And, we're bumping up against the holidays, but we're also just all trying to connect with each other more, I think, in a deeper way right now. If there's anything I've learned from this year, it's that desire to really stay as connected to the people that I call family as I can. So I hope that you guys have taken something away from this, and also that you'll take it into your next writing session. We're going to be doing a couple more of our National Novel Writing Month related write-ins the 29th, and then pretty much all day on November 30th. So if you're interested, if you're inspired and you want to come hang out with us and write, you can find information on our website. But be sure to check out the Larkin Owl bookstore. We'll send you the link, but it's got all of the books that you'll find, both that the presenters have, and then also some really great craft books. In fact, I want to end it with, really quickly, we're going to circle back to Kris because I want her to be able to say some parting words, but maybe we can go in order very quickly. And Deborah, and then Antonio, and then Stacy, can you say a couple words about the craft books that you recommended? Because I would love for people to see that when they are there buying your books, and also the Family Story Workbook. Deborah, what about you?
Yeah, two workbooks that I always keep coming back to are by Kim Adebayo. I want to say it's how to say the last name. I always mess her last name up. But The Ordinary Genius and The Poet's Companion, I think they're just great because I know a lot of books kind of just tell you what to do or just make space for you to create. But I love that her book kind of straddles both lines. And so there's some great examples of how to write about the shadow, right, in your writing. And then there's also like a list of 30 prompts that kind of give you an option of like, these are ways that you can actually incorporate it. And both of those books do that in just really brilliant ways. So those are my two picks that I recommend.
Thank you. Antonio?
Two books that I mentioned, I think one of them is Steen or Stein. I always also mess up his last name. Steen on Writing is written by Saul Steen, who was a New York editor for many, many years. He edited one of the greatest authors of the 20th century. And he was very pragmatic, and the book is very pragmatic in the advice that it offers. I find it like very, very useful. And the other one is Benjamin Percy's Thrill Me. These are essays. I think it's been reprinted for the fifth time now. What's great about that book is, if you don't know Ben Percy's work, like he's a literary author, but he's also been writing like kind of like genre and even comics now for a while. And his whole advice is how to bring elements of literary fiction and genre and blend them together to create like these compelling storytelling devices. So it's a very fun book to write. But also it brings like these two different worlds from craft together. And I just find it very, very wonderful.
Cool. Thank you. Stacy, what about you?
I noticed some people were asking about the titles and the names and links to those in the chat. So just so everyone knows, I think if you follow that link, yes, Becca's repeating it there, to the bookshop.org website, all of those books are on there. And if y'all aren't familiar with bookshop.org, it's really great. I have moved all of if I have to buy something online, if I can't go to Book People or Malvern or Larkinell, I buy it from bookshop.org because they're giving they give money back to independent bookstores. And like Jeff Bezos has made so much money since COVID started. Sometimes I buy non-book things on Amazon. You don't need to buy books on Amazon. You can go to bookshop.org and it's just as easy. So the two books, sorry, there's my anti-Amazon
Sorry for supporting indie bookstore, Stacy Swann. Don't you ever apologize for that.
Okay. So the two books I mentioned, the first one is This Word Now, which is by a friend of the Writers League, Owen Edgerton, and his wonderful wife, Jody Edgerton. It's just got, like Kris's book, like great prompts, often pulling things from your own life, and just really fun ways to start writing if you don't have a particular novel that you're working on. They're really fun. I've used it in classes before. And then there's a book it's the Modern Library's Writer's Workshop by Stephen Koch, which is a book that was once assigned to me in a workshop I took. And it's one of those writing books I go back and now reread like 5 or 6 times. And every time I feel like I learn something new. It's just kind of a general writing book about all sorts of topics like revision and drafting and all sorts of things.
Well, and I'll say that I have been lucky enough to read all of the books by these presenters. And so I hope that you'll get Antonio's short story collection, Barefoot Dogs, that you'll go. There's Deborah is always like at the ready with her jacket for Newsworthy, which is a powerful, powerful poetry collection. And Stacy Swann's novel is brilliant, and it's available for pre-order now, guys. So if you want to talk about really supporting an indie bookstore, and a great author, go pre-order that book that's coming out in May. And Kris, I also ordered your book, and I just think that, I wanted to do this event with you the minute that we first talked, because just the passion that you have for writing and for storytelling is so, so wonderful. And so I want to give you the chance to say the last few words here before we end this evening.
Thank you. Again, just thank you for having me. It's just so cracking me up, like virtually having me. It's just the strange world that we live in, but in the midst of this strange world that we live in, there are possibilities for connection that maybe a year ago we didn't even consider. And I feel like when it comes to storytelling and connecting with others about our stories, it's another one of those moments of connections that we might not have always considered. I was talking to someone who recently picked up my book, and she was sitting down with it with her 90-year-old mother, and they were just going through these prompts together. And she said that she had connected with her mother and kind of gotten to understand her mom as a person so much more by the conversations that just kind of came out of this, that she never really asked her mom about this moment in her childhood or teenage years and all of these things. And just the level of really getting to know your family members, not just your mom, not just your aunt, whoever these people are, but to really in-depth know people. And just in this moment, we need connections more than ever. With this wonderful literary community, connecting with writers is always so empowering for all of us. So thank you for everything you all do with the Writers League of Texas, but connecting with our families is just so important. And I will say, I threw it into the chat a little while ago, that along with the book, I have a free download on my website, which is extra prompts. If you want to have, if 105 prompts is not enough, if you want extra prompts, and if you wanted research on genealogy, on how do you track down if your family came through Ellis Island, how do you even track that down? But there's a whole bunch of genealogy resources, writing resources, technology tools for doing interviews, just a whole bunch of stuff is available for free download on my website, as is, because I have my fiction hat, my last book, the novel editing workbook. I also have a bunch of fiction editing cheat sheets available for download on my website, which I always like to share with folks.
It's krisspisak.com, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Great. So our authors are kindly throwing, and if you want to, Kris, throw your social media handles into the chat, and we will share all of that with anyone who registered for tonight's event. We'll send the link to bookshop.org. We'll send you these social media handles and just remind you of all the ways that you can connect with the folks here tonight. So thank you so much. This was really fun, and I appreciate all of you for being here. And yeah, have a good week. Have the best week that you can have this coming week, guys. Okay. All right. Take care. Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.